In the spring issue of Glass Quarterly, there's a feature article on glassblower Jason McDonald, who holds a master's from Tyler, was a contestant on Blown Away, and has been written about in the New York Times. But Jason felt lost for years before he discovered the goblet form. From the studios of Urban Glass in Brooklyn, this is Glass Quarterly Live, where we take a deep dive into the latest issue through conversations with the writers, artists, and curators in the pages of the magazine. Join us as we speak to Jason about the highs and lows of his remarkable career, and we are also joined by Ellye Sevier, the author.
Hello and welcome to the 7th edition of Glass Quarterly Live, where we take a deep dive into the latest issue of Glass Quarterly magazine. Today, we're going to look at the spring 2026 edition, where we have a wonderful feature article about Jason McDonald, who was kind enough to join us today for today's recording. I thought it might be a good place to start to talk about how this article came to be.
One of the first things that I wrote for Glass Quarterly was a review, and that was for the 2025 Goblet Week at the Museum of Glass. Jason was one of the featured artists, and I was really struck by our conversation and specifically by Jason's approach to goblet making and approach to the form and his narrative approach specifically. So when the opportunity was presented to write a feature on Jason, I was really excited to further that conversation.
Great. And I know also that you guys actually share some history in you both are alumni of the Hilltop Artist Program in Tacoma. Although I believe, Jason, you attended before Ellye, right? There's some years between your time there.
Just a few. I started in 1998. Ellye, when did you start?
I think it was 2012.
What do each of you guys yes. What do you remember about your time at Hilltop? Looking back on it from different distances, what was it like to attend Hilltop for you personally, Jason?
I remember Hilltop being a place of refuge. I could go there and just be myself. I remember that after about a year of showing up, they put me on the production team and started paying me to make work for the program. A whole $30 a shift. That was a lot for... I remember showing up with a purpose at that place.
Great. Excellent. And what about you, Ellye? What were some of your memories of Hilltop?
Yeah, similarly, I found a lot of purpose there for sure. And also a lot of community was probably the biggest draw for me at the time, aside from, of course, the glass.
And I think you mentioned that you became aware of Jason partly because as an alum, the current students would learn about their predecessors, right?
Yeah, certainly I was aware of Jason, and especially when he was at the museum and also on Blown Away, we all were definitely aware that there was a fellow alum really succeeding in the industry.
How important, Jason, was the experience with glass at Hilltop Artists to your career? And, both of you guys, were you both shaped by this experience in some way?
I don't think the importance of Hilltop's influence on my development can be overstated. They introduced me to new ways of seeing the world. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. Through Hilltop, I went to my first art show at the first gallery I ever visited. I went to my first museum through Hilltop. No one in my family or community was going to do that for me. Hilltop artists literally shaped my mind and my destiny.
Wow, that's amazing. And a same question for you, Ellye. What do you looking back? What was the impact for you on this program?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I had never considered myself an artist before working in glass at Hilltop. So it really, previously I did a lot of writing. I was very creative in that way, but I was not really connected to a specific material. So I think through that, it allowed me an avenue of just exploring myself in a new way, but also connecting with community in a new way that has continued to make big waves in my life.
That's great. And for anybody who doesn't know, Hilltop Artists is an after-school and in-school program in Tacoma, Washington, started by Kathy Kapernick and Dale Chihuly a few decades ago. It's just hit its 30th anniversary. Both Jason and Ellye are alum of this program. I did want to say, what was it like after you finished Hilltop, Jason? Because one of the things about glass, as we all know, can be quite expensive. You had this training, you had this experience. Were you able to continue immediately after you left Hilltop?
Yeah, this is a hard topic for me, but after leaving Hilltop, I gave up glass entirely. I didn't think that there was a career in it for me at all. I didn't even really know what a career was at that time. I couldn't see a path forward. It's too expensive to do as an independent artist, and I didn't have any training to navigate the world of trying to be an independent artist. No one was knocking on my door to offer me a job, and I just kind of floated aimlessly for a few years after that. It was hard. It was a hard time. I didn't have any education or support system. I didn't have any real marketable skills. I found that I was working odd jobs where I could find them, mostly unskilled labor, landscaping and construction and entry level service jobs, that kind of thing.
Mhm. And so, do you think that in retrospect that the program might have ended too soon? Like, have they adjusted the program at all to be a little bit more supportive after you finish that program?
Hilltop is and always has been doing good work. And I hope you don't take my next words as like overly critical. But I think what I needed when I left, a guide out there introducing me to people or checking in on me. And I recognize that's a lot to ask from a organization with limited resources. So I think that there probably could have been some more clear-eyed conversations about what life is like outside of Hilltop while I was still there.
I do know that there's been some newer programs, like some apprenticeship programs through Crafting the Future, from also some individual programs, like in Chicago, Firebird Arts, or in Glassroots. They have programs which kind of help structure a sort of like early residencies, early apprenticeship programs. It sounds like that might have come along after your time there, but perhaps people have addressed this a little bit in some programs, that this next step is being considered. But there was a period then between Hilltop and when you did get back into Glass that was a couple years. Is that right? Was there a couple years between that and your next job, which I learned about from the article that Ellye wrote, where you later went back to Glass? But that period in between, that went on for a couple years, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that things got pretty desperate in those years. I didn't have any direction, no real hope. I didn't have any reason to believe that that life could improve, that things could get any better. And I think that in desperation, I turned to crime to sort of supplement the lack of income, the lack of support. And I theft mostly, and I got away with it until I didn't. And when I eventually caught a felony, things went from bad to like even worse. I can say it's probably one of the darkest periods of my life, and I'm not proud of what I did to survive. What you don't realize is that having a felony on your record, like, it comes up on every credit check or every job application. Every time I tried to take a step to make my life better, there was a barrier in front of getting forward, like crippling court fees. And I lost my apartment and wound up living in my car, and then lost my car and had to couch surf with friends.
It sounds like from the article that Ellye wrote, that also Glass was a sort of a pathway for you as you re-engaged with Glass through Glassy Baby. There was a sort of a restructuring or a new opportunity emerged from. This is what I understand from the article that Ellye wrote. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the next step and how that Glassy Baby opportunity presented itself to you.
Yeah, I was living in Seattle, and again, I was doing odd jobs. I think I was working at a Starbucks at the time, just slinging copy for corporate America. Nothing glamorous. And I bumped into an old schoolmate from Hilltop, a guy by the name of Dylan Betts. And
So Hilltop comes back into the story. Hilltop is back in the story. Yeah, nice.
This guy, this alum of Hilltop, said basically, "Hey, you look like you could use a job." And I was like, "Yeah, I could use a job." And so he vouched for me at the Glassy Baby factory he was working at, and got me like an entry-level position, charging the furnaces and loading color up, like doing the entry-level stuff.
Yeah, they do votive candles, and they were hugely trendy about 10, 15 years ago. They had a store in New York, actually, for a little while, selling at different colors. And they did such a great job, I think, early in the viral marketing to have a new edition, and people were literally lining up down the street to buy. And I don't know if that continues now, but the founder had survived cancer and had credited lighting these votive candles for recovery from cancer. That was back in like the 2000s, I think, or late 2000s, early 2010s. But that's great that you were working there and you had the skills that you needed, or you had a connection, and were you able to jump right into it, Jason, thanks to your experience with glass?
No, Andrew, I would say that I didn't have the skills when I showed up. I remember being good at glass as a kid, and then I showed up at this place and realized I didn't know anything. I was the guy that would come in and clean the studio at night to start, and I worked my way onto the floor to make this one very simple product in every color of the rainbow, starting as the charger and working my way up to the color dropper, and then the overlayer and mold blower, and finally the finisher. But this was over the span of a couple of years. I didn't have a good time at that place. I think that the company was purely exploitative in the sense that people that ran it, people were replaceable cogs in a machine that ate people's bodies up, thumbs and elbows and shoulders. But what it was a chance for some stability for the first time in my adult life. And it was also access to the material as much as I wanted to get my hands on it. I could be working. And for, 7 hours of the day, it was making this product, but I could show up before work and get some practice in, or work through my lunch break, or squeeze in moments here or there. And that's where I started to develop this philosophy that I call stealing moments, of like taking every single opportunity I could find to get in an extra gather or to practice a technique. And at first it was purely like economically driven, because if I could work the other jobs, then I could work more shifts and I could get paid more, and et cetera, et cetera. But it shifted really quickly from being the end being financial to the end being, I just really want to understand this material better. So it was in some ways pretty bleak, and in other ways I think it was exactly what I needed to get the number of gathers in that getting good at a thing requires.
Jason, I remember when we were chatting for the article, you mentioning that you were really inspired by the people that you were working with. I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and anyone specific that really inspired you or helped you do something.
Nobody gets where they're going on their own. It's just like this bootstrap idea of picking yourself up and getting yourself where you need to be is a great American lie. And without a couple of people seeing that I was hungry and investing in me, I couldn't have achieved half the things I have. Right off the top of my head, I can think of Rich Langley and Chris Schulke, who saw me applying a whole lot of effort, but not knowing very much at all. And they invited me into their personal little cup studio, where they introduced me to this idea of fancy goblet making. And I was worthless at the time. Like I'm not trying to be humble. Like I didn't know anything, and I was a liability. Having trained a few people now, I realized that I was a liability, and yet they still invited me into the space, and they still let me assist them making their work, and they still gave me time at the end of every day to show me how to do a thing. It's really generous of them. But not just like Chris and Rich. There were several people at the factory, several artists who saw me pushing and wanted to invest in me. David Levy and Darren Dennison, Wahid Sultani, Larry Hogue, Cam Tower. There are a lot of things where I want to go.
And this was mostly people who would invite you outside of Glassy Baby Studio, or was this also within the studio? You were able to have some of this mentorship, or some of this people being generous with time and showing you things. Was that happening both in Glassy Baby Studios as well as outside?
No, I think it was happening inside the Glassy Baby Studios. The other guys that I mentioned, I think that it was, just a job, and it might have even been financially motivated to, if I could get better, then their team could get better and they could make more money. One thing that company does is it sort of pit teams of glassmakers against other teams of glassmakers to incentivize competition.
So Jason, you were kind of first introduced to the goblet form, like you were saying, at this time in your life. And I'm curious, we talked a bit about this in the article as well, but you were really struck by, the technical side of this form and the challenge. So I'm curious how this pursuit of this very technically demanding form began to impact your life in the hot shop and outside of it?
That's a really interesting question, and one that I've been thinking about a lot lately, but I don't think I recognized it in real time. Forced me to examine the outcome of all of my actions. And right now I'm speaking specifically about glassmaking. It's a really responsive material, and every touch has some kind of evidence of that touch. Um, and so I started practicing and honing those skills. And through the attention and focus that it required, started into this well. From my focus went from being really, really broad and scattered to almost a laser beam focus. And I really credit my time specifically with the high risk, very challenging, putting together really fiddly little parts and realizing that if I got distracted even for a moment, that it would hit the ground or crumple or that I would lose the effort up to that point. But it was also in such a short time frame that I could mess up and then start again and then mess up and start again and edit out the unnecessary steps. So I think that on a purely glass level, it helped me learn to focus and got my understanding good. And then in a broader context, it taught me some skills about how to pursue a goal. I credit it with teaching me, credit my practice of goblet making with teaching me how to practice.
Boy, that's interesting. I was gonna mention that one of the things that it seemed to have helped you to focus on was educational progress as well. I mean, in this time frame, which I guess spans years, you also went to earn your GED, earn your bachelor, BA, and then actually a graduate degree as well, an MFA. In this, is that a period of years? Are we talking about how many years would that have been?
I spent about 7 years in the trenches, so to speak, working at that glass and paper factory. It was about 2 years too long. I think I probably should have left 2 years sooner because it was bad for my body and my morale. But I realized that I was stuck in this dead end job that really was getting nowhere. Paycheck. And also, everybody wants stability, but I wanted a little bit more. And so I started looking around about how I could get more access to this opportunity to move forward. And there were a couple of things that happened during that time while I was starting to think about how to move forward. One of them was that I met a friend and mentor, Bill Runneth. I went and took a class with him with some glass and JD people up in Sacramento. He just happened to be traveling, and I didn't know who he was. And I showed up, and I don't know what Bill saw in me because I wasn't taking the class seriously. I mean, I must have showed up to class stoned every day. It's just the reality of where I was at that time. But he saw that I was eager and he invited me to come out and TA for him a couple of times. And that introduced me to a more professional side of glassmaking. And then I was like, okay, I want to move past factory life. Maybe going to school and using the resources of the school to, to get ahead would be a good way. And so I hatched a plot to get into the local art college and to get into their class studio and just use it for everything, spend every spare moment I could there. And I had no idea that they were going to make me write papers and take classes in ceramics and drawing. Like I was frustrated actually that they asked me to chase some things that weren't my singular narrow focus and laugh. It really the best thing that could have happened to me that there were people like my ceramics instructor, Maria Porges, who, when I turned in some BS assignment for her class, said, Jason, I believe that you can do better than this. Is this really what you want to represent you? Tell you what, if you want to remake this, I'm going to give you the chance to do that. And if she called me out my lack of effort and told me a thing that I'm always going to remember, which is every single assignment you get is a chance to put your own storytelling into it. And I think it was that moment that I really started to consider what it meant to be a visual storyteller. So school was what it was in all the ways that it was. It forced me to consider some things that I hadn't thought about, like art history and color theory. And and I was resentful, and they kind of had to drag me through it. But I noticed that there were just like all these great benefits. I applied for a Wingate Fellowship and got it, and I applied to, with the help of a filmmaker student who was also there, I applied to the Blown Away show and got on. And without the professionalism of skilling up in those other areas, I don't think it could have happened. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. We should, can I just mention real quickly, so that's Bill Gutenrath from Corning Museum that was so influential at a certain point in your development that you were referring to.
Yes, let's just say that his legacy is already secure, but his influence in my life is just I can't tell my story without talking about him.
And Maria Porges is also has been written for Glass magazine over the years as a critic. So she's a wonderful writer, and I know a lot about her in her intelligence and her demanding nature as a thinker about art. I think that must have been a great experience as well. So, do you have anything about Blown Away what were your takeaways from Blown Away? Speaking of competition, pitting one glassblower against another.
Yeah, it was a really challenging experience for me. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready, and I went on that show, and I think I made a fool of myself. I said yes to a thing that I wasn't prepared for, and I gotta tell you that making a habit of saying yes to things I'm not prepared for has been a real benefit. I have found that often when you fall forward. I maybe that's a corny thing to say, but I really do feel like having to recognize that I wasn't where I wanted to be, and that if I wanted to move forward, I needed to keep putting in that same rigorous practice. It really spurred me up.
That's great.
Emotionally devastating, but realistically, it was a good thing. And then out of that flowed a few other really fantastic things. Like I took a semester off of my BFA to do that show, and when I came back, I finished up, and I was contacted by institutions that wanted me to come out and teach classes, and places that wanted me to come and do residencies, and designers that wanted me to work with them, and I would say that I've never experienced more success from a failure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the amazing power of a platform, right? Where you can be seen. I've often thought about how Blown Away brought those production values that once were only available to like Dale Chihuly or Lino. Suddenly everyone could have this sort of role as a star performer, even if it's just as one member of a team on a competitive show. But John Moran has told me about how it just changed the game for him, his experience at Blown Away, where people from all over the world were suddenly contacting him. So we've critiqued Blown Away in the magazine, and they don't like us because we were skeptical, but for sure no one can doubt the power of the medium to just bring you into people's living room, to open up opportunities. And one of those opportunities, I know, Ellye, you wrote about in Jason's project with Solange.
Yeah, so in the article, we talked a little bit about this project that you did with Solange, but I was wondering if you could talk a bit about that experience. For background for those listening, you collaborated with Solange and her kind of lifestyle company, creative project. You collaborated with her to make a line of drinkware. So yeah, I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that a bit.
I almost couldn't believe it when someone on her team reached out and asked if I wanted to be a part of this project. I stopped on something. Like it was a prank. In fact, when I got off the call with the guy that reached out to me, I like immediately Googled him to make sure that he was like a legit person. But that conversation led to an ongoing collaboration where I made a line of drinkware. I think it was just shy of 1,000 pieces, but not quite 1,000 pieces. That mission was in my MFA in Philly, and that was a mistake. But again, falling forward is a hallmark of mine, I guess. It created some really late nights and really challenging critiques when I had spent all my energy doing production instead of completing the assignment. but I think that having that on my resume has opened up a number of other opportunities, and I can't I don't want to sound like a broken record, but saying yes to things you're not yet ready for, in terms of like whether it's an opportunity that you feel like your skills aren't quite there, or if it's scaling your practice up to a place where you can be producing before you might have only been producing ones, twos, or at the most tens of an object, but hundreds of an object. Like understanding the infrastructure it takes to produce a line of work. I grew a lot through that, and I professionalized a lot through that. And I also have to say that I owe Solange a real debt of gratitude because she was with me during that phase of professionalizing. She found me at my place and met me where I was at and gave me a lot of flexibility to develop this work with her. And I think it would have been really easy for her to say, "You're not who we thought you were," but instead she let me get better.
Well, I just wanted to say I really loved that collection. And yeah, it was really exciting. I remember when you announced that. We were all really excited to see, someone who came out of Tacoma doing such great things. Yeah. So, some other exciting professional things happening for you that I wanted to just point out. A two-way mirror was the show at MOG that was curated by Jabari Owens Bailey that you were in, and also that show is currently touring, so that's really exciting. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out, and also mention that I also talked with Jabari in the article as well. I was wondering if you wanted to say anything about that experience.
Working with Jabari has been really it's been really wonderful. He's such a thoughtful, present, aware, focused, motivated. I feel like he has the. I hope I don't embarrass him by saying this, but he's definitely got the soul of a poet, and he uses that poetry to talk about some things that really matter. I think that his show is highlighting absences within the field that desperately need attention, and I'm really proud of him keeping into that show.
This might be a good place to mention. In the article, there's a series of discussions about the challenges of the goblet form and the challenges of working against these technical difficulties. But in the article, also, it's mentioned some of the challenges in terms of being a black glass blower in particular. And I wondered if that would be something to discuss a little bit. You explored this in your article with Jason. And how does that manifest itself? I mean, you have so much self-awareness, and it's been so interesting hearing you talk about understanding yourself and your progress. To what degree was that made more difficult, that progress, because of some of those challenges that were discussed in the article?
People look at you sideways when you walk into the shop wearing this skin. The automatic dismissal, it's almost tangible. My entire career has been one of feeling other, and it's only in the last few years as my career grows that I get less of that. But before I took some risks and put myself out there, I think that, well, let me relate a few stories. I can think of one time when I walked into a color supplier new to the region. I won't name names, but I walked into this color supplier as a new person in the area, and the very first person I encountered came up to me and said, "You're not supposed to be here." And what he meant was, "This isn't a and I, because the shop was in a tough neighborhood, but there was no thought or consideration to the fact that I could be there as an artist looking for color. He was just trying to bounce me." Another instance where the dismissal was just so obvious and automatic was I was living and working in Oakland and walked into a studio for the first time because a friend of mine had said to come through on his lunch break. And the shop owner yelled at my friend for not locking the door because the automatic assumption was that, I didn't belong, that I wasn't there. I think that it comes in a lot of different forms. The racism that you experience in this field, I think that it comes in really overt ways, like the stories I just shared, and it comes in much subtler ways, like institutions taking advantage of my image and promoting themselves as some sort of diverse, forward-thinking, progressive space, when in fact, like my face on the front of your flyer is the exception and not the rule. I think that kind of thing has happened enough times that I recognize that I need to take like this fate where there's going to be a photographer and say, no, I'm not going to sign your photo release contract that you hand to everyone. I'm going to amend it to get some autonomy for myself. I'm going to advocate for how you use my image. I think that at first I was really scared to do. It made me worried that people would see me as ungrateful, and I was concerned that I lose opportunity as a result of speaking up for myself in that way. But I think it had the opposite effect in that people respected me for being forward and thoughtful and caring enough to speak up.
What sustained you? I mean, when you were experiencing these clear encounters with people that were, I mean, it must be so discouraging. It must be so,
Andrew, I want this. Plain and simple. I want this. I want this more than anything else. It's what I've chosen. It's the thing that has brought me all the best things in my life. I'm not going to let anyone push me out. I'm going to chase it until it's not fun anymore. And then I'll find another hobby. And that's a direct quote from a rapper that I really enjoy. I'm going to do it until it's not fun anymore. Mm-hmm. I also recognize that this field is just full of privileged people who have robust support networks. But many in the field are just treating it like it's a plaything. And I don't often compare myself to others. That's not, I really feel like my journey is a competition, me against me. But I see those people with all the opportunity, who just aren't making any progress. I don't ever want to take for granted the gift that it is to show up in that space and work my ass off toward my goal.
Right. I was just going to ask you about that. Do you see any signs of improvement over the last couple of years with some of the work that's been done, by crafting the future and making more opportunities available with Better Together, where there are these events that celebrate the presence of people of color in the hot shop environment? Are you seeing a shift in a positive?
Yeah. There's some people out there doing some really important work. Corey Pemberton and Cedric Mitchell, Sarah Beth Post, Pearl Dick. And I think that like all of those people that I just mentioned and more that I'm going to kick myself for not like being able to rattle off the top of my head. There are people out there who are thoughtfully considering historical absences and what it means to make it a more inviting and inclusive space. Really proud. I think that there's a long way. I think we're inching forward, but I do think we're inching toward an equitable future. Yeah, I got a lot of hope.
Ellye, in your article, you talked a bit about the future plans and some of the things Jason is working on now and planning on. Do you want to discuss a little bit of that now?
Yeah, so something that I think is really exciting that's upcoming for you, Jason, is the Tacoma Art Museum Award, the current that you were recently awarded for this year 2026. So yeah, do you want to talk a bit about what that means, what that award is, and what hopefully, exhibitions are on the horizon for you?
So right now I'm in residence at the Penland School of Craft and I'm building a hot shop for myself. I spent the last year putting that together and it costs a mountain of money to put a shop together. I started with a bit of the current award. It was able to, it was a lifeline. I would not, my first wouldn't be on right now without that. So it was a big up in that way. And then I was also able to talk my way into a museum show at the Tacoma Art Museum. So I'm sending work next week to a show. That's really exciting for me to finally get a solo museum show under my belt. And it feels really good to be doing it in my hometown.
Yeah, I know you and I talked a bit about Tacoma and what it means to you to be showing in Tacoma and just to be from Tacoma. Do you want to talk a little bit about how Tacoma shaped you as an artist or what it means to be coming back and showing in Tacoma?
Yeah, I think that circumstance is everything. And if I hadn't come up in a region that was so steeped in craft, was so history in craft, who knows what I would have wound up finding to do with my time. But I happen to come from a place that just has has a lot going on in that area. I think that being in that place at the right time, being in a community that supports the arts, has had like a really profound impact on me. Yeah. So I'm in residence at Penland for the next 2 years, and the 15th of this month marks my first year of being here.
Yeah, that's an amazing it's a fellowship, right? A 3-year fellowship.
Yeah, it's a 3-year gig where I get a place to live in a studio building that's 4 walls and a roof. And then the expectation is that I fill it with everything I need to run my practice. So this whole past year has been fabricating equipment, building kilns and benches, and acquiring all the tools I need to make my practice happen. Something that I nobody told me before I moved in here, that there was going to be a ton of support from the community. I was scratching that happened. Forced to buy a furnace, and then a friend who did me a real favor just said, "Hey, I'm going to buy the furnace from the North Carolina Glass Center that they've been trying to sell, and I'm going to give it to you." And he didn't have to do that, but he saw that I'm hungry, that I'm after it, and wanted to support me in that way. That was Tom Warwick. And I find that kind of thing happens again and again and again around here. Like, I needed bricks to build a kiln, and one of the board members said, "Hey, I'm getting out of the glass fusing business that I had, and I had some bricks in my garage." And so I went over, and it wasn't just some bricks. It was probably 8 boxes of fire bricks that were, like $5 a piece or something. And it wasn't just 8 boxes of bricks, but it was also 2 boxes of fiberboard and a controller for, computer controller for a kiln. He gifted me all of the materials I needed to make that happen.
Amazing.
So I feel really like I'm choking up. It's pretty wonderful.
I wanted to ask you one last question. Going off of that, you've just kind of built this foundation at this residency for yourself. What are you going to do with that? What are you looking ahead to do? What are the exciting plans that you are going to now be creating in this new space that you have?
Ellye, the future's wild. Who knows? Yeah, it's totally unpredictable. I came here thinking that I wanted to build a production business, and now I'm thinking this maybe not a production business, but maybe I'm just going to spend the 2 years that I have left. There's such a gift where I'm never going to have so much time and space to myself again making art. And I think that's really what I want to focus on for the next 2 years.
It's so interesting, Jason, because that fellowship is designed to be this sort of 3-year process of somebody being removed from all of that hard driving, getting ahead. You've given, obviously you're doing a lot to get yourself ahead in this period, but we've written about that particular program at Penland, which is that long because they wanted to give people that kind of runway to really breathe and think and not just have to keep making, but actually strategize about the future. So what an incredible opportunity. Yeah.
It's really amazing. It feels like a no fail area. I've got 2 years.
Right.
I expect a lot from myself.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for sharing and for telling this incredible story. Ellye, thank you for bringing Jason's experiences into Glass Magazine. If you'd like to learn more about Jason McDonald and his career, please pick up the latest spring 2026 edition of Glass Magazine. And thank you both so much for spending the time with us today in Glass Quarterly Live. Thank you, Jason.
I appreciate you having me here today. Thank you.
Yeah, Jason, I really appreciate your time and your voice.
Yeah.